Hello and welcome back to FundedYouth's Remix Challenge series. Today we're going to be going through the tutorial on how to make a brand new catapult. You can follow along to this video or you can look up our tutorial on our doc site, and then we'd love to see what you guys make and how you're able to change up our design. Today we're going to start with the wheel. You're going to drag a cylinder onto the work plane and you're going to set it to the maximum number of sides, or 64. This is a good time to check that your snap grade is set to millimeters, because we're going to lower this down to 10 millimeters in height, but we will keep the diameter as 20 in both directions. Next up, we are going to select our object and we are going to duplicate it. Once you've duplicated the object, we are going to change our diameters to 10.5 and 10.5. You can either change it individually or you can hold the Option key to change both at the same time. And we'll be turning this into a hole. Now, select both objects and select Align, and we will align this to the center. And just be careful of misclicking off because you might need to redo it. There you go. And once you have both objects aligned in the center, you can make a hole to give us our first wheel. Once we've done that, we can simply duplicate it a few more times until we get all 4 wheels. Select all of those, and then we're able to just move those to the top of our work plane so they're out of the way. Next up, we will be building the arm. Just like the wheels, we are going to start by dragging a cylinder onto the work plane. We are also going to increase the sides to maximum, or 64. For this cylinder, we are going to lower the height to 10 millimeters, and we are going to change it to be 40 by 40. Once you have this, we can duplicate the cylinder, and we are going to move this second cylinder up 3 millimeters. Select that second cylinder. Be careful you're clicking on the right one, and we're going to change the dimensions to 34 by 34, but go ahead and keep the same height of 10 millimeters. After this, you can turn this piece into a hole, and we're going to select and use the Align tool to center it. Make sure that you've selected aligning off of the bottom cylinder, so that way everything remains lined up and 3 millimeters from the base. Once it's properly aligned, select again and group your items to create the top of the arm. Next, you are going to drag a cube onto the work plane. We are going to adjust the dimensions of this cube to be 180 in length, going away from the top cylinder we've created, and then it's going to be 10 width and 10 height. So when you've adjusted all of your measurements, it should look something like this, and you are going to roughly align it to the center of that top cylinder that we created. Next, we will be dragging another cube onto the work plane. And the only adjustment we're going to make to this one is making it 35 millimeters in length. After that, drag a cylinder onto the work plane as a whole and place it against the side of the cube. We are going to adjust the cylinder to be 10.5 in diameter. And we're going to select both and align. Make sure that you're aligning to the red block so that way the hole can be centered on the object. You can then extend this object to go all the way through your block. If it's easier, you can also just call this length 45 millimeters and center it within the block. Next, we are going to select the cube, the hole, and the earlier rectangle that we placed onto the work plane. We are going to align all 3 of these objects together. Make sure you're aligning them to the red block with the hole in it. You will want to make sure that the pin is center, and then align it to the end. Once everything is properly aligned, we are going to select that middle pin, and we are going to move it until it reads 35 millimeters away from the end of the block with the hole. Once this is done, you can select it and make sure that it is still properly aligned to the center in case there was any wiggle when you were moving it. And once that is done, you can finally group all these objects together. This way, the hole will be able to go through both the block and the arm that we've created. Now we are finally ready to align the arm with the top of the head. Roughly bring the objects over and then select all of them and align to the red pin. So that way that orange cap is centered. Once everything is centered, we can group the object together. Once we've done this, we're going to drag another hole onto the work plane, and we are going to adjust the size to be 3mm by 3mm. This will be placed a little bit away from the top of the head, wherever you want, and we are going to align it to the center. And then once that is done, you can group it together, and that is the arm complete. Next up, we are going to work on the turn, buckle, and pin part. Drag another cylinder onto the work plane, and we are going to adjust the size of this to be 9.5mm in diameter both ways, and we are going to make it 100mm tall. Once you've done this, we are going to drag another cylinder onto the work plane. Then we're going to change this cylinder to a size of 5 by 5, and we will rotate it 90 degrees so it's perpendicular to the first post we made. From here, we are going to extend it to an overall length of 30mm. Once we are at our final length, we are going to select the object and duplicate it. Then we'll select it, and in the horizontal plane, rotate it 90 degrees to create a cross. You can then select and group both items. Once these objects are grouped, you can lower them together, so that way they are on the base of the work plane. And from here we can align our central post to this cross post. Select all your objects, click Align to make sure everything is perfectly centered. And once centered, group all the objects together. Once this is complete, we're going to drag another cylinder onto our work plane. In this cylinder, we are going to give a diameter of 9.5 both directions. And our overall height is going to be 70mm. Now we're going to select this pin, we're going to rotate it 90 degrees and bring it down level with the work plane. Here you can see that it's currently 2mm below the work plane. We're going to duplicate our object. And we are going to move the second one off to the side. This piece will be used again later when constructing the main body. Now we can place our pin next to our stand, and we're going to select the whole block. We're going to make it go below the work plane and then large enough to encompass both the bottoms of the pin and the post. We are doing this in order to create a flat bottom so that way when we take this file and 3D print it, it has a flat base to rest upon. We will make sure that everything is properly grouped while also duplicating the hole to make sure that it's selecting all the objects. And we will make sure that everything is properly grouped with the hole. There we are. This way, when we click off of it, you can see that there is now a flat base on both the post and on the pin. We can now move this off to the side and prepare our workspace to finish this catapult off with the main body. Select that pin that you finished earlier and pull it into the center of your work plane. This will be used in part of our construction of the main body. We are going to move this pin off to the side and we are going to shorten the overall length to 20mm long. Once this is done, you can set that off to the side for now, and we are going to drag a cube onto our work plane. We are going to change the length and width of this cube so that way it is 60 by 175mm. This will form our base, and we are going to leave the overall height at 20mm. Go ahead and drag another cube onto the work plane, and on this cube we are going to change the width and the overall height. We're going to make the width a total of 60mm, and we're going to change the height to 30mm. We'll leave the length as 20. Go ahead and duplicate this object so we have two of them, and we're going to extend the height of this one to be a total of 60mm. Next up, we're going to select our first block and we are going to align it to the front of our base. You can just select both objects and we can use the Align tool to make sure it's perfectly centered and flush to the front. Next up, we are going to do the same thing with the back piece. We're going to align it to center and to the end. Once this piece is aligned to the end, we are going to select it and move it forward 35 centimeters. Once you've moved this piece forward, we can select all these again and use the Align tool to make sure it remains in the center. Before we group it, we are going to add a hole. We are going to adjust the size of this hole to be 10 by 10 by 69. This way the hole will extend all the way through the block. From here we can select the hole and that piece and make sure that they are both aligned to the center of the red block. We're now going to adjust the height. Go ahead and bring your hole all the way up to the top and then bring it level with it. Then slowly begin bringing the hole back down. We're going to make an adjustment to this measurement here to make it a total of 5 millimeters. We can now duplicate this hole and bring it over to the first block that we made. First, we're going to group those together, and now, just like before, we can select the block and the hole, and we can make sure everything is properly aligned. Once everything is aligned, make sure you select all the objects and group them together. This makes sure the hole cuts through both the base and the block. And make sure that that end block is also grouped to the base, so it's all one piece. Next up, we are going to place a cylinder onto the work plane, onto the side of our base. We are going to adjust the size to be 10 by 10 by 100 millimeters long. Next, we are going to duplicate the cylinder and drag it over to the other side. Next, we move the rod into the base. We are going to try and get it as centered as possible. We're going to adjust the height so that way it is well within the block. However, we want the bottom portion of it to just go below the work plane. The easiest way to do this is to have the pin level with the work plane. From there, you can slowly lower it down 2 millimeters. Now we can do the same to the second post, but if it's easier for you, feel free to delete that and just reduplicate it in its current location, so that way it's a little bit more aligned and it'll be on the same level below the work plane, and you don't have to do any guesswork there. We're going to bring that second post a little bit further in, so it's roughly 15 millimeters away from the end. Once all the pieces are in position, we are going to do the Align tool once again to make sure they are aligned to the center. And then we can finally group them all into one piece. It's now time to create the flats for the bottom of our base. For convenience, make sure you grab the piece that we finished earlier in a previous step and bring it next to the base. We are going to select the whole cube and bring it down below the work plane. We are going to adjust its overall size to be 18 by 118 by 232. Once you have the dimensions set, duplicate it and slide it over so you can group the piece and the hole individually. You can then group the second hole and the base to create our flats. Now all our pieces are sitting flush to the work plane. Next, we're going to drag a hole onto the work plane. We are going to make the overall length of this hole 40 millimeters. Then you are going to pull the hole all the way through the base. Anywhere from 40 to 43 millimeters is acceptable for this step. Then make sure you lift it up so it cuts through the entire base. Once that is done, we can align to make sure that it remains perfectly centered, so both sides will be equal. And we can group them all together. Now we are going to drag a cube over to the piece we finished earlier. We are going to adjust our dimensions to make this cube 10 by 60. Next, we are going to select both of the objects and we are going to align them. We can align the orange piece to the center and make sure that it is flush to the front of the block. We also want to make sure that both pieces are flush to the work plane. Now we can finally lower the height to a total of 12 millimeters tall. Select both objects and group them together. We can now move this in between the two pieces that we've created on our base and bring it close to the front between those two back end nubs. Go ahead and select all three objects, and we can align it to make sure that piece is perfectly centered. Once that is done, group them all together to create a solid piece for the base. Drag another block onto the work plane. We are going to change the width of this block to 60 millimeters. Then we are going to adjust the number of steps to maximum, or 20, and we'll change the radius to 2.5. Once you've rounded the edges, we are going to select the block and rotate it to an angle of 22.5 degrees. We can now take this block and drag it over to the rest of our base. We are going to position it between the two tallest posts in the front and lift it up so it is directly between them. This part might take a little bit of finagling. So long as that block is firmly between the two posts, your build will be secure. But you can do it more similarly to the orange one that we showed you at the beginning as an example, or you can place it directly between the two red posts like we have here. Make sure you select all the objects and align it so that way that block is perfectly centered, and once you're happy, group them all together to complete your base. Now you've finished all the pieces. They are ready to be exported and sent to your 3D printer. Once printed, assembly is easy. The only thing you will need to grab is a rubber band. This will create the tension we need for our catapult. First, we can slide the wheels onto their post. They should slide on easily and move freely. Next, we can take the arm and the pin, and we can slide it through the holes to keep it in place. The turn wheel then goes in the last two holes in the back. Next, you can take your rubber band, and we're going to wrap it around the small nub in the back. Then bring the rubber band forward and over the bottom of the arm to create our tension. And that's it! You can just pull back and release for your catapult. Or, alternatively, you see this small hole here on the turn wheel? You could thread a piece of twine through that and through the small hole in the arm. Then you're able to use the turn wheel to crank the catapult back and launch from there. This can also keep the catapult from lifting too soon, so you can hold your fire. And congratulations, you have completed your catapult. Now that you followed this tutorial, we want to encourage you to remix this design and change it up to make it your own. Maybe you'll change how the head looks, or work with the design of the body to make it something really cool. But we want to see what your imagination does. So, go ahead, complete your remix challenges, and then tag us on Instagram with the hashtag FundedYouthRemixChallenge. We also want to see what kind of ammo you use. You can see here that we're using the little 3D print poops from our color changes. We can't wait to see what you'll create. So, make sure to tag us on Instagram, and we'll see you next time for the next remix challenge.